They chose champagne over my son's funeral. My parents, my sister, my best friend since I was 8. Everyone in the same luxury hotel, toasting, laughing, while I buried my 9-year-old boy alone. My son's coffin looked impossibly small. 9 years old, only 9 years old. I was alone in the cemetery. My parents didn't come. My sister didn't come. No one. Do you know where they were? At my sister's engagement party, toasting with champagne, right at the time of the funeral. But that was just the beginning. When they found out about the $800,000 trust my son left behind, it all made sense. This is the story of how my own family tried to destroy me and how I fought back. The coffin seemed impossibly small. That was the only thought I could form as they lowered it into the earth. 9 years. My son was only 9. I pressed my hands against the black fabric of my dress, but nothing could stop the trembling. The cemetery was nearly empty. I counted in my head, me, the pastor, the cemetery attendant, and my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, for people to send off a child who deserved crowds. My parents didn't come. My sister Victoria didn't come. Not even Sarah, my best friend since I was 8. I reflexively checked my phone and immediately regretted it. Victoria's feed automatically loaded, her in the elegant downtown hotel, white wedding dress, champagne flute raised, my parents beaming beside her. The post time, 20 minutes ago. Exactly when the pastor was talking about my son's courage. Are you okay, dear? Mrs. Henderson touched my arm. They didn't come, I whispered. Not one. For 18 months, this 70-year-old woman brought me food when I was too exhausted to cook. She sat with Caleb when I needed sleep. And today, she was the only one who showed up. My phone vibrated. A message from my mom. We need to talk. Bring the fund documents tomorrow. I stared at the screen. Not a single "we're sorry." Not an explanation. Just, bring the documents from the fund. The trust fund. $800,000 my ex-husband Marcus had set up for Caleb's college education before he was transferred overseas. Now it was mine legally. The last thing my son had left. I typed back, I'm burying my son today. The answer came in seconds. Don't be dramatic. This is important for the whole family.
The whole family.
The same one that chose champagne over a funeral. I turned off the phone completely. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house in the suburbs. My stomach churned with every block. When I parked, I recognized Sarah's silver sedan in the driveway. Of course she would be there. My father opened the door before I could ring the bell.
Come in.
We're waiting. The living room looked like a corporate boardroom. Victoria sat on the couch, legs crossed, her hair in a perfect bun. Sarah stood beside her, studying her nails. My mother stood by the fireplace, her hand on a family photo of us all smiling. A framed lie. No one mentioned Caleb. My father got straight to the point. He grabbed a folder from the coffee table and slid documents toward me. We need to restructure the trust with Victoria as trustee. Sign here. I didn't touch the papers. What are you talking about? Victoria leaned forward. You're clearly not in a position to manage that kind of money. We're trying to help. You've always been impulsive with money, dear, my mother added with false sweetness. Remember that boutique you wanted to open? Thank God your father kept you from that disaster. I looked at Sarah, desperate for some sign of the friend I knew. She met my eyes briefly before looking away. We've already spoken with Marcus's lawyer, my father continued. Given his current mental state, he agrees this is the most prudent course of action. I picked up one of the documents. Mental competency assessments. Psychological evaluations. Another paper caught my eye. Research on trust fund laws, dated 14 months ago, when Caleb was first hospitalized. You've been planning this since he got sick, I said, realization burning. While I was at his bedside, you were researching how to get the money if he died. Victoria rolled her eyes. You're being dramatic again. That's exactly why we're worried. My father pulled another document from the folder. If you refuse to cooperate, we'll seek legal protection. Any judge will understand that grief has impaired your judgment. The betrayal crystallized. They had dismissed my concerns about Caleb's health for 8 months, calling me overprotective. Now I understood why. They were taking a stand. Memory after memory realigned itself. My mother 10 months ago. It's probably just anemia. You always exaggerate things. My father when Caleb needed specialized treatment. These doctors are taking advantage of your anxiety. Victoria declining every invitation to visit him. Hospitals are so depressing. I noticed an architectural plan under the documents. I pulled it out. Victoria's new house design. 200,000 kitchen renovation. Home theater. Infinity pool. You've never visited him in the hospital, I said. Not once in 8 months. Victoria shook her head. We all process grief differently. For the first time in my life, I saw my family clearly. Not as the support system I'd tried to believe, but as people who only saw me as useful when convenient. Why now? I asked. Why the urgency? Victoria and my parents exchanged glances. Some silent communication passed between them. Okay, Victoria finally said. You deserve to know. My fiancé's company is having cash flow problems. We may have to postpone the wedding indefinitely without additional financing. My mother fiddled with her pearl necklace. And there's the vacation property we bought. The market took an unexpected turn. We're not villains, my father said, softening his tone. We're just a family facing hardships together. Sarah finally spoke, her voice small. My divorce will be finalized next month. Victoria has promised me a management position at her fiancé's company. I have twins to support. I saw them then. Not as cartoon villains, but as scared, desperate people willing to sacrifice me to maintain their lifestyles. If you refuse, my father warned, we will be forced to take legal action. My mother took my hand. After everything we've done for you and Caleb over the years, this is how you repay us? I almost laughed. What exactly did they do? $20 birthday cards? We need to resolve this in 60 days. Victoria checked her expensive watch. Before the next project's funding deadline. The desperation in their eyes told me everything. I stood up slowly, gathered my documents, and put them back in my briefcase. I need time to think. Stop. My father's voice had the sharp edge I remembered from childhood. Don't you dare leave this table. I closed the front door behind me. In the car, I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel.
My phone rang.
Mrs. Henderson. How was the meeting? Before I could answer, another call. Marcus's parents, on the other side of the country. We just heard about the funeral. My ex-mother-in-law's voice was warm. We're devastated we couldn't be there. We were traveling in Europe. We loved that boy very much, my ex-father-in-law added, his voice breaking. The contrast with what he had just witnessed was brutal. As I hung up, I remembered something Marcus had mentioned when setting up the fund. If you have any problems, contact Richard Donovan. He is the best trust lawyer in the state. I called his office. A receptionist answered. I need to speak to him as soon as possible. It's about the trust fund set up for Caleb Walker. That afternoon, I sat in Richard Donovan's office, surrounded by polished wood and legal tomes. I gripped my briefcase so tightly my knuckles turned white. Richard stood as his assistant showed me into the room. Distinguished silver hair, reading glasses. Firm handshake, kind but appraising eyes. Mrs. Walker, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm so sorry for your loss. Thank you. My voice trailed off. I slid the folder across the table. My family wants me to sign over the trust to my sister. They say I'm not mentally stable due to grief. Richard opened the folder, scanning with practiced efficiency. The silence stretched. They didn't go to your son's funeral?
No.
My sister had an engagement party on the same day. He took off his glasses. I remember very well when your ex-husband established this trust. He was exceptionally specific. Richard opened a drawer and pulled out a folder with Marcus's name on the flap. My breath caught. Your ex-husband was extraordinarily thorough. He pulled out a notarized document. This is his statement of intent for the trust, filed separately. I recognized Marcus's handwriting immediately. This fund is established to secure our son's future. In the event of the unthinkable, These funds must provide for his mother, who sacrificed everything for his care. She alone should benefit, for she alone earned it through her devotion. Tears blurred my vision. There's more. Richard turned the computer monitor. A spreadsheet showed incoming calls. Numbers I recognized. My parents' house. Victoria's cell phone. Have they contacted your office? Our main line. Asking general questions about trust fund provisions. My assistant flagged the calls because she recognized the family's names. They've tried several times in the last 14 months. Cold clarity cut through my grief. They knew the terms of the trust before Caleb died. Mrs. Walker, I want to be absolutely clear, Richard said. This trust has explicit legal provisions preventing family interference. Your ex-husband has built multiple layers of legal protection. Your family has no legal basis to challenge it. The trust is, legally speaking, shielded. The weight on my chest eased slightly. So they can't take him? Not legally. But they can try other tactics, like claiming you're mentally incompetent and filing for guardianship. I thought of my mother's message at the funeral, of Victoria's cold calculations. Then I don't need to fight for control of the fund, I said slowly. I just need to document your true intentions. Richard's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Do you have documentation of your attempts? I showed him my mom's text messages. His eyebrows rose. That helps considerably. I suggest we arrange a meeting with your family, but on your terms. In a public place. 2 days later, I sat in a corner of a busy cafe, my manila envelope on the table. The cafe was bustling with afternoon customers, just as I'd expected when I chose this spot. Mrs. Henderson was waiting in the car across the street. Richard was on standby, just a connection away. My family arrived together. Victoria leading, my parents following, Sarah avoiding my gaze. Victoria immediately reached for the envelope. So you finally signed. I placed my hand on the envelope. Before we discuss paperwork, I want to know why none of you went to Caleb's funeral. My mother sighed. Victoria's engagement party was planned months in advance. We couldn't cancel everything. It was your grandson's funeral. And we mourn privately, my father replied softly. Everyone processes loss differently. I opened the envelope and pulled out photo printouts, screenshots from Victoria's social media, all timestamped during Caleb's funeral. Champagne flutes raised, her diamond ring glinting, everyone laughing. While I was burying my 9-year-old son, you were drinking expensive champagne and laughing. People at nearby tables began to stare. Victoria's face turned red. You're taking this out of context. I pulled up a second document, the notarized terms of the trust, with a passage highlighted in yellow. No amendments or transfers without the explicit consent of the primary beneficiary. Marcus made his intentions crystal clear. My father held out his hand. Let me see those documents. I pulled it back. I spoke to Richard Donovan. He has Marcus's original statement of intent. The fund cannot be modified or accessed by anyone else. Not now, not ever. Victoria's face finally cracked. You don't deserve this money. You're going to waste it like always. His voice rose, echoing through the cafe. Several customers turned to look. Lower your voice, my mother hissed. Why? I asked. Are you worried these people will hear how you tried to exploit your grieving sister? How you couldn't show up at your nephew's funeral, but desperately want his college fund? Victoria stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly. This is ridiculous. We're trying to help, and this is what we get. I don't need your kind of help, I said calmly, gathering the papers back into the envelope. I'm not signing anything. Ever. My father leaned in, his voice dropping to a menacing tone. You're making a serious mistake. We could make things very difficult for you. You already have, I replied, standing up. But that ends today. I left the cafe, feeling their gazes burning into my back. Outside, Mrs. Henderson waited in her car, window rolled down. When I got into the passenger seat, she gave me a proud smile. You defended yourself beautifully.
My phone rang.
Richard was calling. I described the confrontation in detail. They will almost certainly try something else, he warned. But you've set firm limits. After we hung up, another call came. Marcus's parents, offering their support. They offered to fly from Arizona to provide testimony about Marcus's intentions, if needed. A text message followed from a former coworker who had regularly visited Caleb in the hospital. Your neighbor told me. I'm here to help. For the first time in weeks, the crushing weight on my chest began to lift. I touched Caleb's picture on the dashboard, his last school photo taken before he got sick, his smile still radiant. First step complete, darling, I whispered to her image. You are wonderful today, Mrs. Henderson said. I nodded, looking at the horizon. But they won't give up easily. And we'll be ready when they try, she said with determination. You're not alone anymore. I took a deep breath, feeling something unfamiliar well up inside me. Not just grief or anger, but genuine determination. They didn't bother to say goodbye to my son. They absolutely couldn't decide what would happen to his legacy. 3 days later, I spread documents across Richard's mahogany desk, my hands now steady. Grief still throbbed beneath my skin, but something else had emerged. Cold, clear determination. They'll file for conservatorship, Richard said with certainty. It's their clearest path to accessing the fund. I nodded, studying the detailed timeline I'd created. 18 months of Caleb's illness mapped out in excruciating detail. My sister never does her own dirty work, I observed. She'll use our parents as primary petitioners. A smart observation, Richard said with genuine respect. We need to document every interaction since Caleb's diagnosis. I pulled out my phone, opening my meticulously kept calendar. I have records of every doctor's appointment. I can prove I've never missed one. And your parents? Your sister? 0 visitors, I said. Not when he was diagnosed. Not during the 3 weeks he spent in isolation. Not when the doctors said there was nothing more they could do. Richard took careful notes. Document everything. We're not making our move yet. We prepare thoroughly first. I scanned a hospital billing statement. 8 months of intensive treatments and not a single visit. Mrs. Walker, this isn't just about proving that you're competent. It's about proving that they never genuinely cared about Caleb, only about his money. The words stung, but the truth in them steadied my resolve. Then, that's exactly what we'll prove. Over the next hour, we pulled together financial statements showing my meticulous management of Caleb's medical expenses despite limited resources. They'll claim your grief makes you unstable, Richard warned. We need to counter that narrative. Mrs. Henderson kept a detailed journal, I said. She documented every time she helped with Caleb. Richard nodded approvingly. Perfect. Observations from neutral third parties will carry great weight. I pulled out my own notebook. I also contacted Caleb's primary oncologist and his teacher. They both agreed to provide character statements. Excellent work, Richard said with clear satisfaction. What about your ex-husband? I called his parents last night. They're coordinating with his lawyer abroad to get documentation. Richard made another note. I'm also arranging for you to meet with Dr. Elizabeth Warner tomorrow. She can professionally evaluate you and address any mental fitness challenges. I hesitated before sharing my next piece of evidence. I've been collecting screenshots. Every time they dismissed Caleb's illness as nothing serious. Every message where they claimed I was exaggerating. That's exactly the kind of evidence we need, Richard said quietly but intensely, to expose your true motives. I looked out the office window. Caleb loved fall. Last October, I'd wheeled him out of the hospital just so he could feel the fresh air on his face one last time. Are you okay? Richard asked gently. Just remembering, I forced myself back to the present. What else do we need to prepare? My phone vibrated. Mrs. Henderson, I just heard from a friend at the hospital. Sarah was asking questions about Caleb's treatment schedule. Be very careful. I showed it to Richard immediately. They're gathering ammunition, he said darkly. Sarah would have privileged access to information about when you were in the hospital, your emotional state. She probably signed an affidavit stating that you were unstable. She's been my closest friend since we were 8, I whispered. Your sister is clearly recruiting anyone with inside knowledge of her life, Richard said gently. But we can fight back. I remembered now how Sarah's visits had become less and less frequent as Caleb's condition worsened. Her uncomfortable expressions when I'd break down crying. She'll testify that she witnessed erratic behavior, I said. And honestly, she wouldn't be entirely wrong. I've broken down at times. Don't do that, Richard said firmly. That's exactly what they want, to make you doubt yourself. Who wouldn't crumble under those circumstances? My phone vibrated again. Mrs. Henderson, I found my diaries. You need to see this immediately. Coming over. 30 minutes later, Mrs. Henderson entered the conference room carrying a stack of spiral notebooks. She placed them emphatically on Richard's desk. Sarah can say whatever she wants, she announced. But I documented everything. Every day you spent in that hospital. Every night you stayed up with him. Every meal you brought him, because you wouldn't leave him long enough to eat. She took my hands. Don't let them make you doubt yourself for a second. The warmth of her hands steadied my trembling ones. I looked from my neighbor to Richard, then to the growing mountain of evidence. You're right, I said, squaring my shoulders. I need to prepare for complete character assassination, not just legal challenges. Later that night, my hands shook slightly as I pasted the final photo onto the evidence board. It showed my parents at Victoria's engagement party, champagne flutes raised, the date and time stamped exactly 42 minutes after Caleb's casket was lowered into the ground. This is the final piece, Richard said, stepping back to examine our completed work. The entire conference room wall had been transformed into a comprehensive timeline. Medical records, financial statements, witness statements, a documented 18-month absence from my family. Will that be enough? I asked. Richard adjusted his glasses. They're going to file for emergency guardianship on the grounds that you're mentally incompetent, but we anticipated every argument they might make. He tapped the notarized affidavit from Marcus's parents. That documentation alone makes their legal position extremely tenuous. I traced my finger along the timeline. 18 months of hospital visits, countless nights sleeping in uncomfortable chairs, the treatments, the hopes raised and dashed. I never thought I'd have to prove I was a good mother, I whispered. You shouldn't have to do this, Richard said. But people who desperately want what isn't theirs will create any narrative that suits their purposes. My phone vibrated. Mrs. Henderson, 23 neighbors signed the character petition supporting you. I've spent the last week amassing an arsenal of documented truth, I said, looking at Victoria's social media posts where she subtly questioned my mental state. Classic strategy, Richard nodded grimly. They can't win on legal grounds, so they're trying to win in the court of public opinion first. The phone on his desk rang sharply. Richard answered, his expression darkening. I see. Thank you very much for letting us know. He hung up and turned to me. Someone requested Caleb's complete medical records yesterday using a forged authorization. My stomach dropped. Who would do that? Your sister used an old emergency contact form that she apparently kept. The room seemed to tilt slightly. They'll twist everything. They'll find that time I questioned a medication dosage or got emotional with a nurse and use it to make me look incompetent. They're getting desperate, Richard observed. This breach of confidentiality actually shows how far they're willing to go, which works to our advantage. I gripped the edge of the table. What else are they doing that we don't know about? Richard opened his laptop and typed quickly, then turned the screen to me. A message from my former supervisor appeared. Your sister called yesterday asking questions about your emotional stability. What's going on? Call me. They're building a comprehensive case against me, I said, anger finally breaking through my grief and fear. Trying to systematically erase everything I did for Caleb. Richard closed his laptop with a decisive click. We need to add a defamation counterclaim to our legal strategy. I thought of Caleb's brave face during his treatments. If my 9-year-old son could face death with courage, I could face my family with the same determination. Let them try whatever they want, I said, my voice firmer. We have something they don't have and never will. What is this? Richard asked. The truth, I replied, turning back to our evidence board. Every moment I spent with Caleb, every decision I made for his care, Every sacrifice I made without hesitation, it's all documented here. They can't erase it, no matter how hard they try. Richard nodded with clear approval. I'll update our legal response package tonight. That night, we refined our complete strategy. Character witnesses prepared. Evidence meticulously organized. Countercharges drafted. Mrs. Henderson called as I drove home. The security system is working perfectly. Your ex-husband's parents will arrive tomorrow morning with all the documentation. Thank you for everything, I said, feeling overwhelming gratitude. You did absolutely everything possible to protect Caleb's legacy, she said firmly. Now we wait for them to make their move, and when they do, we'll be ready. As I pulled into my driveway, I realized something fundamental had shifted within me. The paralyzing grief hadn't disappeared. It probably never would. But it had been joined by something powerful, fierce, protective determination. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry, rightfully so, and ready to fight. The sheriff's knock on my door felt like a physical blow. His fingers held out a thick manila envelope. Destiny Walker? You've been notified. My hands shook as I accepted it. Inside my kitchen, I spread out the documents and scanned the official letterhead, Emergency Petition for Guardianship. They weren't just coming for Caleb's money. They wanted legal control of me, of my entire life. My phone rang almost immediately. Richard. They filed the petition, I said. I know. How are you? I glanced at the enclosed affidavits. Sarah's signature jumped out first. 3 full pages detailing every moment of weakness she'd witnessed. The times I'd forgotten to eat for days. The night I sobbed uncontrollably in the hospital hallway. They distorted absolutely everything, I whispered. I turned the page. Financial statements showed my severely depleted savings account. 18 months without a steady job while caring for Caleb had drained everything. They highlighted every overdraft fee, presenting it as evidence of financial irresponsibility, not the reality of a mother spending every last penny trying to save her son's life. The hearing is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, Richard informed me. We knew this was coming. We're prepared, but I wasn't sure I was ready. It wasn't just about money. They were trying to take away my autonomy, my dignity. Did you see this morning's paper? Richard asked quietly. I pulled up the local news site. There they were, my parents in their immaculate living room, expressions of profound sadness. The headline, Local Family Seeks Legal Help for Grieving Daughter. My father's quote in bold. It breaks our hearts, but we have to protect her from herself. I switched to social media. Victoria's post, a childhood photo, her arm protectively around my shoulders. Sometimes the hardest thing is to intervene when someone you love is suffering. Keep our family in your prayers. The comments section overflowed with messages of support for them. Hundreds of people who had never met Caleb offered prayers. They've already tried and convicted me in the court of public opinion, I said bitterly. Courts don't decide cases based on social media likes, Richard replied firmly. I've filed our comprehensive counterpetition. Your ex-husband's parents arrived this morning and are prepared to testify. The Hospital Ethics Committee issued a formal statement condemning the unauthorized access to Caleb's records. And we have overwhelming evidence of your complete dedication. I touched the silver locket around my neck, feeling the outline of Caleb's photo. What if it's not enough? That will be enough, Richard said with absolute confidence. My phone rang. Mrs. Henderson. Everyone ready for tomorrow. The whole block is on your side. For the first time since the sheriff had handed over those papers, I felt something other than paralyzing fear. A spark of determination. They weren't there. Not once. Not for chemotherapy. Not for a transfusion. Not for one terrifying night when Caleb's fever spiked and I thought I'd lose him right then and there. Rest tonight if you can, Richard said. Tomorrow will be intense, but we're ready. But rest didn't come. At 9:48 p.m., my doorbell camera alert flashed. Victoria stood alone on my porch, her body language strangely uncertain. I activated the recording on my phone before opening the door, keeping the security chain locked. What do you want? She looked different.
Softer.
Can I come in? Just to talk sister to sister? Absolutely not. His shoulders slumped. Please, this doesn't have to be so public and ugly. We're still family. You made this public when you gave that interview to the newspaper. Victoria looked at the security camera. I'm offering you one last chance to avoid complete public humiliation. Withdraw your opposition to the guardianship petition. Sign over the trust deeds to me. We'll take it all away. I think you should get off my property. The carefully constructed mask slipped then. Pure anger flashed across her features. Do you really think you deserve this money? You've always been the family's burden. The problem child. The constant disappointment. She leaned closer to the narrow doorway. We've carried you your entire life. Now it's time for you to do something useful. I closed the door without another word. I immediately called Richard, forwarding him the full recording. Perfect, he said after watching. Her mask has finally completely slipped. This is exactly the evidence we needed. It was past midnight when Mrs. Henderson arrived at my door with a bag. I thought you could use some company tonight. Thank you, I whispered. Tomorrow we show them what real strength looks like, she said firmly. My phone lit up. Richard, all set. Your ex-husband believed in you completely. We all did. Trust the process. I couldn't sleep, so I sat in Caleb's room, holding his favorite stuffed dinosaur. The fluorescent stars we glued to the ceiling still glowed softly. I took out my medallion and opened it to see his smiling face. Tomorrow is for you, I whispered. For your legacy. For the first time since the sheriff had knocked on the door, I felt something other than fear. I felt genuinely ready. I entered the courtroom with my head held high, flanked by Richard, Mrs. Henderson, and Marcus's parents. The polished wood and solemn atmosphere evoked a sacred space. My sister, parents, and Sarah sat opposite, their faces carefully arranged in expressions of concern. All rise for the Honorable Judge Marion Peabody, the officer announced. A stern-faced woman in her 60s entered. She reviewed the petition with narrowed eyes. These are extremely serious allegations. I expect solid evidence, not emotional manipulation. My family's expensive lawyer stood up. Your Honor, this is a tragic case of a loving family trying to help a daughter who is spiraling after an unimaginable loss. He theatrically presented documents. Miss Walker exhibited concerning behaviors. Erratic financial decisions. Complete social isolation. Aggressive refusal to accept help. I clenched my fists as he painted me as dangerously unstable. Sarah took the witness stand, not meeting my eyes. Destiny changed drastically during her son's illness. She became obsessed with treatments, paranoid. She would call me at 3 a.m, completely hysterical. The memory of those desperate nights cut like a knife. Sitting beside Caleb's bed, terrified as his fever rose, reaching for someone I thought was my true friend. My mother testified next, delicately wiping away perfectly timed tears. We are heartbroken watching her self-destruct. It's not about money. It's about protecting our precious daughter. The judge's expression seemed to soften slightly. Cold fear swept through me. Then Richard stood up, and the energy in the courtroom changed dramatically. Your Honor, what we witnessed today is not genuine concern. His voice filled the courtroom with calm authority. It is calculated exploitation. Ms. Walker did not self-destruct. She was systematically attacked by family members who completely abandoned her during her son's catastrophic illness, but then appeared the moment they learned of the substantial fund. He began methodically dismantling their case, presenting hospital records that documented every appointment I attended, every treatment decision I researched, every night I slept in an uncomfortable chair. I'd like to call Catherine Winters, Hospital Records Administrator. A middle-aged professional woman confirmed, our system clearly shows that Victoria Walker accessed the complete confidential medical records 2 weeks ago using an outdated and invalid authorization form. This constitutes a serious HIPAA privacy violation. Victoria shifted uncomfortably. Shocked whispers rippled through the courtroom. Mrs. Henderson testified next. I watched Destiny care for that precious boy every day for 18 months. When he couldn't keep food down, she spent hours researching special meals. When he was terrified of treatments, She created elaborate superhero stories. Her eyes met mine. I never, not for a moment, saw her waver in her dedication. Marcus's father testified, "My son set up this trust with absolutely explicit instructions. He told me, 'Dad, if anything happens to our boy, Destiny gets everything.' She sacrificed everything to give him the best care possible." The judge's expression had changed. Her eyes were sharper, more skeptical. "Your Honor, I would like to present one final crucial piece of evidence," Richard said. He played the recording of Victoria's nighttime visit. His voice filled the silent courtroom. "If this goes to court, we will destroy your reputation completely." My calm response followed, "I think you should leave." Then Victoria's true nature emerged. "Do you think you deserve this money? You've always been the burden, the problem child." Victoria's face turned a deep red. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. Judge Peabody called a 15-minute recess. When she returned, her expression was thunderous. "Mr. Donovan, do you have any additional evidence?" Richard nodded. "One last piece, Your Honor." He played an audio recording of our meeting in the cafe. My family's voices filled the courtroom. My mom, "Once guardianship is approved, we can immediately resolve Victoria's mortgage situation. Victoria, and the beach house repairs. The contractor needs 50 grand by next month." My father, "Once we have legal guardianship, we can use the money as we determine is best." A heavy silence fell over the courtroom. Judge Peabody removed her glasses. "I have carefully reviewed all the evidence and testimony. This court finds absolutely no basis for the petition for emergency relief. In fact, what I see is deeply disturbing, a coordinated and calculated attempt to exploit a grieving mother purely for financial gain." Victoria started to protest, but the judge cut her off with a glare. "This court dismisses the petition with prejudice, meaning that petitioners may not refile on these same grounds. I further order an immediate investigation into possible perjury. I grant a restraining order prohibiting all petitioners from any contact with Destiny Walker. The fund will be unfrozen immediately and permanently protected from future legal challenges." The judge looked directly at me. "Ms. Walker, this court finds that you acted with remarkable strength, clarity, and responsibility during an unimaginable loss. Your son would be extraordinarily proud." My parents and Victoria stood up, trying to approach, but an officer immediately intervened. Richard turned to me, his professional demeanor softening. "The system worked today, Destiny. Justice was served." Mrs. Henderson had proud tears in her eyes. "Your son would be so incredibly proud." Marcus's parents hugged me tightly. "You honored our grandson in the most beautiful way possible." As I walked out of the courthouse into the sunlight, I touched Caleb's photo in my locket. His last school portrait, smiling bravely despite having lost all his hair to chemotherapy. Reporters waited with cameras. A month ago, I would have lowered my head. Today, I stopped and faced them. "Mrs. Walker, how do you feel about the decision?" I straightened my shoulders. Today, justice was served for my son and his memory. The truth always matters, even when people desperately try to bury it. As the cameras flashed, I walked toward the future Caleb would have wanted for me. A future where his memory was not only preserved, but actively honored through the strength he helped me discover. 6 months later, I stayed in the pediatric blood disorders ward, where Caleb had spent so many difficult hours. The walls were brighter now, painted with elaborate underwater scenes he would have loved. A bronze plaque next to the nurse's station read, "Caleb Walker Memorial Wing, where hope lives on." A young nurse approached. "I'm Jennifer Abrams, the first recipient of the Caleb Walker Memorial Scholarship. I can't thank you enough." "My son would have been thrilled," I said, and realized with surprise that I was smiling genuinely. "He wanted to be a doctor someday." The foundation is already making an incredible difference. 3 families received emergency housing assistance in the first month. Caleb's Legacy Foundation now provided comprehensive support to families facing the same struggles, covering expenses that insurance refused, providing emergency housing near hospitals, funding specialized training for pediatric nurses. Mrs. Henderson served as volunteer coordinator. Richard handled legal matters pro bono. Marcus's parents had become grandparents advocates. I spoke regularly at support groups for parents of chronically ill children. The first step is believing you can do it, I would say. The second is understanding that you don't have to do it alone. My voice no longer trembled when speaking in public. My hands no longer shook when signing documents. The broken woman who had stood frozen beside her son's grave had transformed into someone stronger. Exactly 1 year after Caleb's funeral, I returned to the cemetery alone. The path felt different now, no longer a dreaded march, but a purposeful visit to a sacred place. I placed fresh flowers beside the headstone, tracing the engraved letters of his name. "Excuse me," a voice called. A woman approached with a little girl holding her hand. "Are you Destiny Walker?"
I'm Sarah Michel.
"This is my daughter Emma. She was diagnosed with the same condition as your son last year." The girl stepped forward, shy but determined, holding a handmade card. "Thank you for helping me get better." I knelt down to her level, seeing in her healthy face the future my son had been denied. "You're welcome, Emma." Standing up, I shared Caleb's story with them, not with pain, but with genuine pride. "I hear the foundation is expanding?" Sarah asked.
Yes.
"Funding research into rare blood disorders starting next quarter, and launching a national grandmother advocacy program." When they left, I took Caleb's action figure out of my pocket and placed it against the headstone. "I kept my promise," I whispered. "Your legacy is safe and growing stronger every day." Standing in the same place where I once felt utterly abandoned, I was now surrounded by the presence of those who had become my true family. Not bound by blood, but by something infinitely stronger. Choice, loyalty, genuine love. "The family that truly matters isn't always the one you're born into," I said softly to Caleb's memory. "It's the one that stands by you when you need it most." As I walked back to my car, the morning sun warm on my face, I realized something profound. Sometimes, the deepest betrayal leads directly to the most powerful transformation. I wasn't just surviving. I was truly living a life that honored everything Caleb taught me about courage, love, and never giving up. And every day, through the foundation that bears his name, he continues to save lives.